There's something different about the INFJ. Anyone who's known one up close will tell you they don't fit in the usual boxes. They can feel distant but deeply emotional. They seem calm but carry storms inside. They're private but still seem to understand others in ways that feel almost psychic. They don't just observe life, they sense it. But here's the part people don't always talk about. Many of these qualities didn't just happen. They didn't show up out of nowhere. For most INFJs, the roots go way back, into their earliest years, into childhood. And that's where the story really begins. It's easy to look at personality types and treat them like fixed categories. But every personality is also shaped by how it was allowed, or not allowed, to grow. And for the INFJ, childhood often plays a huge role in shaping their quiet depth, emotional radar, and inner world. Ask most INFJs about their early life, and they'll tell you they felt different, even if they didn't know why. They might describe vivid imagination, strange dreams, intense emotions, or the ability to feel tension that others didn't notice. They often learnt to be careful with their words. They watched, listened, stayed quiet, but they were always collecting information. They weren't always taught how to use these traits. In many cases, they had to figure it out alone. But those early years planted seeds. Seeds of reflection, empathy, insight, and quiet strength that only grew stronger with time. This video is about those seeds. 6 childhood links that don't just explain the INFJ, they reveal how their most powerful traits were formed. Not in noise, not in praise, but in silent moments that shaped who they would become. Let's begin with the first link, the one that many INFJs recognize the moment they hear it. Link number 1, early solitude or intense inner play. One of the first signs that someone is an INFJ, especially as a child, is their relationship with solitude. Long before they understood personality types, many INFJs naturally drifted toward quiet, alone time. Not because they were shy, not because they were left out, but because they preferred it. There was a calm in being alone, a peace in quiet space, a sense of control and creativity that didn't depend on anyone else. You might hear INFJs talk about hiding away in their room for hours, building imaginary worlds, reading for long stretches, drawing detailed scenes, or simply thinking about ideas that made no sense to anyone else their age. While other kids were running around chasing noise and chaos, INFJs were often wrapped up in thoughts, stories, or silent activities that let them feel at home in their own mind. And here's where that link becomes powerful. This early solitude wasn't empty. It was full of building blocks, of imagination, of reflection, of sensitivity to detail. It helped the INFJ develop their inner voice early. It helped them get comfortable in silence, which later became one of their greatest sources of strength. While others needed approval or constant activity to feel alive, INFJs were learning how to explore entire worlds without ever leaving the room. And for INFJs who didn't choose to be alone, but were isolated due to being different, misunderstood, or rejected, that solitude shaped them in another way. It made them observers. It gave them time to see how people work, how emotions move, how small changes in behavior reveal hidden feelings. And over time, it turned them into quiet experts at understanding others, because they'd spent years studying from the edges. That early pattern of solitude, even if it felt strange or lonely at times, was never wasted. It was a space where the INFJ's inner compass began to form, where they started building the quiet mind that now helps them navigate life, love, and purpose with such clarity. So when someone says they just need to be alone, it might sound simple. But for the INFJ, it's more than that. It's not escape. It's returning to where their real self was first born, in silence, imagination, and the freedom to think without limits. Link number 2. Heightened sensitivity to emotion in the environment. Most children notice big things, Loud voice, bright colors, people laughing or yelling. But INFJ children notice more. They pick up on tone changes, unspoken tension, subtle shifts in body language, and the overall emotional atmosphere of a room. Even as young as 5 or 6, they can often sense when something isn't right, without anyone saying a word. This is a link many INFJs share, even if they don't realize it at first. Maybe they remember watching their parents argue through silence rather than words. Maybe they sensed that a teacher was sad, even when that teacher smiled all day. Or maybe they just felt off in certain places, without being able to explain why. That emotional sensitivity isn't a weakness. It's a radar. One that often starts working early in life and never turns off. And the reason it sticks is because INFJ children often had to use it. Whether they grew up in calm homes or chaotic ones, that emotional awareness gave them an edge. It helped them stay safe. It helped them predict moods. It helped them manage people around them, sometimes without even knowing they were doing it. This constant awareness became part of their personality. It taught them to read between the lines, to listen to how something is said, not just what is said, to sense what others miss. And over time, it helped build the empathy they're known for today. But it also came with a cost. Being emotionally tuned in all the time is draining, especially for a child who doesn't know how to process it. Many INFJ kids felt overwhelmed by emotions that weren't even theirs. They absorbed the mood of the room. They felt pressure to keep the peace, and they often struggled to explain why certain things felt heavy or wrong. Because of that, many INFJs learned to carry things quietly, to process feelings alone, to pretend they were fine, even when their chest was tight or their thoughts were racing. They learned to filter the energy around them, to adjust their own behavior to avoid emotional spikes. But in doing so, they also developed one of the rarest skills in human connection, emotional insight. As adults, they often know what someone needs before that person even speaks. They can sense lies, confusion, or discomfort just by sitting beside someone. They can offer the right words at the right time because they've been watching the emotional storm long before it broke open. That skill, the one that feels almost supernatural, starts in childhood. And while it may have been painful at times, it gave INFJs the ability to not just feel with others, but to feel through them, and often for them. Link number 3. Challenges in belonging or fitting in. One of the hardest parts of childhood for many INFJs is the quiet feeling that they don't quite fit. Even in groups where they're liked, even in families that care about them, INFJ kids often feel like they're watching the world from the outside. They might be surrounded by others, but still feel alone. This feeling doesn't always come from bullying or rejection, although sometimes that happens too. More often it comes from the INFJ's unique inner life. They think deeply, feel intensely, and ask questions other kids don't ask. They care about things most people overlook. They read emotion, crave honesty, and get overwhelmed by surface-level talk or loud environments. And when they try to share their thoughts, it doesn't always land. So what do? They adapt. They stay quiet. They act normal. They try to blend in, even when their mind is filled with big thoughts or emotional layers that don't match the moment. And in doing so, they begin to feel even more separate, because they're hiding who they really are just to feel close. This early experience of not quite fitting in often leaves INFJs with a strong sense of otherness. They may not understand why, but they carry it. In the back of their mind, there's always a little voice asking, "Why do I feel different?" Or, "Why doesn't anyone else seem to see things this way?" But here's where the link gets interesting. That experience, the one that made them feel out of place, also helped shape one of their most powerful qualities, a deep inner identity. Because they didn't feel like they belonged in the outside world, INFJs were pushed inward. They spent more time reflecting, journaling, thinking, and creating their own sense of meaning. They started to trust their inner voice, not just the voices around them. And over time, that inner life became their compass. They began to live by their values, not trends. They questioned systems. They formed beliefs based on reflection, action, not pressure. They became the kind of people who could stand alone when needed because they'd already done it. Many INFJs still carry that quiet loneliness into adulthood. But it's not always a weakness. In fact, it often becomes a strength. It keeps them honest. It helps them connect deeply with other outsiders. And it gives them the courage to stay true to themselves, even when they still don't fit in. That early struggle to belong didn't break them. It built them. Link number 4. Deep fascination with meaning, stories, or visions. While other kids were chasing toys or copying cartoons, INFJ children were often sitting somewhere quiet, lost in a story. Maybe it was a book that felt more real than real life. Maybe it was a thought they couldn't let go of. Maybe it was a question like, why are we here? Or, what happens after we die? That stayed in their mind far longer than expected. This hunger for meaning shows up early in INFJs. They're not satisfied with surface explanations. They want depth. They want to know what things mean, not just what they are. And that drive leads them to books, ideas, stories, spiritual questions, and imaginary worlds that other kids might ignore. It doesn't matter what form it takes. Some INFJ children read fantasy novels and build entire worlds in their head. Others stare out the window and think about the stars. Some get drawn into symbols, stars, chillings, or religion. Others find themselves writing poetry or asking adults questions that make them uncomfortable. This isn't just curiosity. It's a signal that their mind is wired differently. They don't just collect information, they connect it. They link what they feel to what they imagine. They turn small details into big pictures. And through that process, they develop something most kids don't even think about, a personal philosophy. That inner search for meaning also feeds their intuition. Because they're always asking why, they start to pick up on connections faster. They see how events lead to other events. They spot patterns. They feel the energy of things, what's beneath the surface, what's about to happen, and what it all might mean in the long run. What makes this trait unusual is how serious it can look in such a young child. Adults might say the INFJ is mature for their age, but the truth is, they're just built for depth. And once that part of their brain lights up, it doesn't shut off. It becomes the base for everything they grow into, how they think, how they dream, how they create, and how they help others make sense of life. That quiet kid who asks strange questions? They're now the adult who sees what others miss and helps people understand themselves through insight, vision, and meaning that comes from deep inside. Link number 5. Early responsibility, observation, or caretaker role. Some INFJs had a peaceful childhood, but many others grew up in environments that forced them to grow up early. Maybe they had to care for siblings. Maybe they watched adults who couldn't handle their own emotions. Maybe they were the good child who held everything together while the family struggled. Whatever the reason, a lot of INFJ kids took on more responsibility than they should have. Not always physically, but emotionally. They became the peacemakers, the listeners, the ones who noticed when someone was upset, even if no one else did. And because of that, they often felt like the emotional anchor for the people around them. This pattern can start early. An INFJ child might comfort a parent who's stressed, step in to calm down an argument, or quietly take care of things without being asked. They don't always know why they're doing it, but it feels natural. It feels like their role. That early caretaker role taught them how to manage emotion, both their own and other people's. It taught them when to speak and when to stay quiet. It taught them to watch carefully, to listen deeply, and to think about what someone needs before reacting. And while this helped develop their emotional intelligence, it also created a lifelong habit. Even as adults, INFJs often find themselves in roles where they're supporting others. They are drawn to work that involves healing, guiding, or teaching, not because they want power, but because they're used to carrying people's emotional weight. What makes this link powerful is that it didn't come from a training manual. It came from real life. The INFJ didn't read about emotional awareness, they lived it. They watched people crack, then tried to hold things together. They noticed pain that others missed. And that early practice turned them into some of the most emotionally grounded people in the room. But it also means INFJs need to unlearn some things. As children, they may have felt like they had to be perfect or always strong or always calm. And while that built resilience, it also taught them to hide their own needs. So the gift is real, but so is the cost. The INFJ who learned to care for others early in life now has the power to guide, help, and understand people in a deep way. But they also have to remember they deserve care too. Link number 6, internal conflict or unspoken truths in early years. Not every INFJ had a chaotic or emotionally intense childhood, but many did experience something that stuck with them, the pressure to stay quiet. Not necessarily by force, but by the situation around them. Maybe they grew up in a home where emotions weren't talked about. Maybe they noticed things that adults ignored. Maybe they felt something wasn't right, but no one else would admit it. This silence left a mark. INFJ kids often felt like they were carrying unspoken truths, secrets, feelings, or observations that didn't have a place in the open. And instead of expressing those things, they learned to carry them inside. This is where the internal conflict begins. They might have felt one thing, but were told another. They might have noticed emotional pain, but were expected to smile. They might have been confused, but had no one to ask. So what did they do? They turned inward. They created space inside themselves to hold all the unspoken feelings, all the questions, all the truths that had nowhere else to go. And that's how their emotional depth began to form, not in loud moments, but in silent ones. This ability to hold emotional complexity without speaking it out loud became a survival skill. It gave them room to process. It made them careful with their words. It helped them sense what was safe to say and what had to be hidden. And while this wasn't always healthy, it was powerful. Over time, this inner conflict became something more. It became insight. INFJs learned to see emotional truth even when others couldn't. They could feel the tension in a conversation, even when the topic was light. They could hear the pain behind someone's laughter. They knew when someone was lying to themselves, even if they didn't say it out loud. They didn't get this skill from books or classes. They got it from early life, from situations where silence spoke louder than words, from moments when their emotional truth didn't match the surface of their world. And while that mismatch was hard, it shaped something rare, emotional honesty. Not just with others, but with themselves. As adults, INFJs carry that same ability. They can sit with pain. They can notice what's not being said. They can name the truth, even if no one else will. And while it still feels heavy at times, it's also what makes them so strong, so clear, and so grounded. That early silence didn't shut them down. It trained them to listen. And now, they listen better than almost anyone. So what really makes an INFJ who they are? Yes, they're born with certain traits. But those traits grow inside experiences, especially the quiet ones. Childhood didn't just shape them. It revealed them. From their early solitude to their sensitivity, from their inner conflict to their deep curiosity, INFJs were being formed long before they understood the word personality. The things they felt, the things they noticed, the roles they took on, those became the soil for their empathy, their vision, and their quiet strength. They didn't always get the space they needed. They weren't always understood. But they watched. They listened. They learned how people work, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and they did it in silence, while others were too loud to notice. Now they carry all of it. The old feelings. The quiet strength. The invisible knowledge of what's true, even when no one says it out loud. If you're an INFJ, these childhood links aren't just memories. They're part of your foundation. They're the reason you see so much. The reason you care so deeply. The reason you can sit with pain, hold contradictions, and still speak with clarity. And if someone you know is an INFJ, these links help explain why they are the way they are. They weren't made in one moment. They were shaped slowly, carefully, often alone, and with a depth most people never even recognize. Understanding these links isn't about blaming the past. It's about honoring what it gave you, and using it now to live with more purpose, more understanding, and more truth.